I work with Oxford University Press, and on behalf of the press, the Bharati Institute of Public Policy at ISB, and Energy Policy Institute at Chicago, I'd like to welcome you to today's event, which is a debate on the topic Green Signals or Red Lights. Does environmental regulation in India need reform? This has been organized to mark the publication of Mr. Jairam Ramesh's recently released book, Green Signals Ecology, Growth, and Democracy in India. Public policy is a core area in which Oxford University Press, a department of the University of Oxford, publishes across the globe and for many years now. Our authors range from classic thinkers to modern masters, including 20th century Nobel Prize winners, and come from across the globe. Our Clarendon Lectures series contains works by many of those whose thinking is currently driving the subject forward, and our publications collect together leading scholars to address important policy topics affecting us today. Published and developed in partnership with the world's most prestigious learned societies, we are also proud to publish leading journals in the area. A very welcome addition to this veritable list is Green Signals, the book under discussion today, which brings together the written records of a minister into the public domain in one place so that scholars, administrators, activists, and all those interested in public policy can get a flavor of how and why he did what he did. This is indeed a fascinating idea and a great opportunity for documenting how the green versus growth tug-of-war played out inside the government of a developing economy, desperate to maximize its gains from abundant yet finite natural resources. As the author himself says, it offers a unique insight into the complexities, contradictions, challenges, and conflicts that surround the interplay of ecology, growth, and democracy. Let's therefore hear from the author, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, and our other speakers for the evening. Mr. Shyam Devan, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India. Ms. Bahar Dutt, Wildlife Conservationist and Journalist. Mr. Tejpreet Singh Chopra, President and CEO, Bharat Light and Power. And Mr. Anand Sudarshan, Executive Director, Energy Policy Institute at Chicago University, whom I'd now like to invite to take the evening forward.
Thank you very much. Let me start by, before I talk about why I think this book is important and interesting, let me start by giving the mic to Sri Jairam Ramesh to just say a few words about what he wanted to achieve in writing this book and what he feels is important, are the important questions around environmental regulation today and whether it needs reform.
Thank you. Oh, I don't need this mic. Thank you, Anant, and welcome to all of you on a Friday evening. Can't hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Welcome to all of you on a Friday evening. We could be doing better things. To this panel discussion on a book that has just been published by the OUP and which has been priced in such a manner that the pirated version might end up being more popular than the actual original. So any complaints on the price may please be directed at OUP and not to me. There are many reasons for writing this book. The first and most important reason was that after the electoral debacle of 2014, I suddenly found myself having a lot of time. Parkinson's law, work expands to fill the time available. So there was a lot of time, and I thought, how best should I spend this time? And fortunately, I had all the records of my tenure in the Ministry of Environment and Forests. And I thought that it might be a good idea to put together an anthology of the written word, not the oral word, of the written word in that ministerial tenure, which lasted for about 25 months. Now, it was important because I think environmental issues came into the mainstream of the developmental discourse during that period. Because I believed that here was a time for us to take environmental issues seriously and not as fait accompli, as they had tended to in the past, and to highlight the fact that the country has reached a stage where we have to make choices. And that was really what guided my ministerial tenure. And the big challenge, as I said, as I explained in the opening to the book, the Prime Minister gave me three tasks. When I went to him and I asked him, why of all people are you making me Minister for Environment and Forests? I have no record of being an environmentalist. If anything, I am seen to be dyed in the wood champion of the growth at all costs lobby. Why are you putting me into this thankless job? And he said, well, three things. And the themes of the book revolve around these three things. First, he said that, look, the Environment Ministry has acquired the reputation of being an ATM ministry. Now, I don't want environment regulations to replace industrial licensing. So what we did in 91 to industrial licensing, do in a manner which preserves the sanctity of the environmental regulatory process, but do it in a manner that does not make it as an impediment to economic growth. So that was theme number one. The second theme that he highlighted was the fact that there are real environmental issues that we face. Issues of water conservation, land degradation, forest conservation, air pollution now increasingly, which is becoming very significant. And we have to do something about it. We have the laws, we have the regulations, we have the rules, but they have not been enforced in the manner that they should have. And therefore, make this a moment to send a message that laws matter, regulations matter, rules matter. And the third task that he said was reposition India in the global climate change debate. That India was seen to be obstructionist, India was seen to be a negative player, India was not seen to be part of the solution, and we should really be taking the lead on not just climate change issues because it affects us, but also on international environmental issues. So this was a three-point mandate. And the book really revolves around how these three themes got addressed during this period. Now, one of the consequences of the 25 months was the 12th five-year plan, which got unveiled sometime in 2012, had rapid, inclusive, and sustainable growth as its three objectives. The 11th five-year plan, which was earlier 2007 to 2012, talked of rapid and inclusive growth. So for the first time, really, we were talking about rapid, inclusive, and sustainable growth. It was still growth, the framework was still growth, but growth had not only to be rapid, but also to be inclusive, as well as to be sustainable. So this book brings together a written record of how the issues related to environment, environmental regulation, the choices that had to be made between economic growth on the one side and environmental conservation on the other were exercised. And there were many institutional innovations that I tried to introduce, which unfortunately did not survive my departure. Apart from the glass doors in the office, the most important institutional innovation, which I thought was very important, was and Shyam will relate to this, was based on the advice I got from Harish Salve, the concept of a speaking order. That ministers just sign and they decide. But where goes into that decision? Why a decision is taken and how a decision is taken is very important to explain to the people. And therefore, in a 25-month period, I had 13 speaking orders, and many of the speaking orders, Bahar would criticize for the content of the speaking order. But that was the idea. The idea was that everything should be out into the public domain and everybody should know why decisions were being taken and what are the factors that went into making of the decision. Many of them were controversial. They continue to be controversial. The moratorium on genetically modified brinjal, for example, the Mahan coal block, which is very much in the headlines now, in the context of the auction of coal blocks, the Navi Mumbai airport, the international airport in Navi Mumbai, and many of these issues, the Jaitapur nuclear power park, and so on and so forth. Now, I'll stop here just to say that what this book really tries to give the reader, give the interested reader, the scholarly reader, the student of environmental issues. It's not a pop book. It's not a tell-all book, but it's a book that brings together how contradictions and how conflicts which are inherent in the process of integration of environment and development sought to get resolved. And I think this is more than a record of the 25 months, because today we are wrestling with this issue. In fact, this is one of the most important issues in developmental discourse in India today. That how do you address environmental and sustainability concerns in the context of a rapidly expanding economy? There are those who believe that environmental regulations are a bottleneck to growth, and therefore we should move to an era of light regulations. And there are those who believe that we need to do regulatory reform, that we need to keep the sanctity of the regulatory process, maybe reform the manner in which the regulations are implemented, but we need those regulations in place. So this big debate is very much on, and the next few months you're going to see this debate gather momentum and acquire a certain greater public discourse as the government tries to bring forward amendments to the existing legal framework in Parliament. So let me stop here, Anand, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what I felt was important about the book, but also some of the questions that came to my mind reading the book. As a personal confession, I actually started when I finished my PhD. The first job I had was to come back to India to work on an ambitious and still ongoing research policy partnership that was started by then Minister Ramesh. And the experience of sort of work, and this was an effort to sort of look at how we regulate industry for air pollution, and can we do a better job regulating industrial air pollution? Can we use markets to reduce costs? So it got at the heart, in some sense, of this dichotomy we face today between the fact that many of our environmental outcomes are very bad by any standards. Air pollution, for example, India is possibly the worst country in the world, depending on how you count. But at the same time, it is not the case that regulation is seen as being light or easygoing by most people in industry. So it seems that no stakeholder is really happy, and that's sort of one reason also for the topic of today's discussion is, do we need sort of some sort of structural reform? But anyway, so I've spent the last 2 or 3 years, 3 years now, working on this one effort, and this has spanned ministers and spanned governments and gone from center to state. And so some of what I read into the book comes from that experience. So I think there are two really important things about this book, which is why I'd encourage all of you, even if you're only tangentially interested in the environment, so long as you're interested in governance, it's worth reading. The first is that it's a very rare insight into decision making at the very top of government, into the different sort of voices, different opinions, different stakeholders, and different sort of checks and balances that are involved in making decisions. And the fact that we had a minister who was putting down reasons for why he did what he did doesn't mean that you'd necessarily agree with the final decision, but it'll give you a unique insight into the complexity of these decisions. And I think that's very important today, because it is probably the case that we oversimplify how we talk about the environment in the media and in popular discourse. We often make it an environment versus growth problem. The other important thing that I think this book does is underline exactly how there is no easy trade-off between environment and growth. The reasons we are interested in environmental regulations, the reasons we worry about the environment, is that these are public health concerns, these have productivity effects, these have long-run effects on whether we can use natural resources efficiently or not. And so there really is there's no team of economists versus team of environmentalists, at least if anyone is doing a good job. So some of those things are very well brought out by the book, partly by reading the sorts of things the minister has to look at in making decisions, and partly in the foreword to the book. Having said that, I thought the book also left a lot of questions unanswered, which I thought would be useful to discuss. The book starts by talking about by making the point that when the minister came into the Ministry of Environment and Forests, he felt it was sort of the 1991 moment for environmental regulation. In other words, just as in 1991, we needed economic liberalization, we needed to really change the rules of the game in order to kickstart the economy and in order to both meet goals of equity and balance as well as economic growth. Similarly, there's a sense that that environmental regulation in India needs the same sort of structural reform. But I think as we read through the book, there's a question on there's an open question: have we had that kind of structural reform? Not just in the year and a half that Sri Jairam Ramesh was minister, but after that, and indeed with the new government, are we getting any closer to that kind of structural reform, and what would that consist of? Is the new government's efforts to set up a high-level environment committee to look at all the laws and revamp them the sort of move we really need to make that 1991 moment solved? So that was one big question that I had in my mind. The other one was a very interesting question on what does good environmental regulation and effective environmental regulation look like in a world where compliance is very poor? Now, this is one of those things that also makes it difficult for environmental decision making to be transparent. It makes it difficult for people to look at what's really going on, how much are plants emitting, how much pollution is there. The fact that many of our laws have very poor compliance. And why laws have poor compliance is a problem that occurs after the clearance problem. So we have a lot of conversation about whether a project should occur or why there was a year taken to give environmental clearance to a project, or whether we should have POSCO or whether we should not have POSCO. But the point is, once projects are cleared, once they're in the field, why do we see low compliance, and how do we solve that problem? And low compliance normally means normally means that there's something about the regulatory costs and there's something about the structure of enforcement that tends to make the system less effective than it should be. So it's rarely about good people versus bad people. It's often about bad regulation instead of smart regulation. So those were the questions that sort of came to mind. With that, I'll turn this over to Bahar. What we'll do is we'll have all our panelists say something about this, and then maybe turn over to some questions from the audience, and then give the last word back to Ms.
Thank you, Anand. You've raised some of the issues which I was planning to raise as well. But I just found it interesting this morning in the Hindustan Times. There's a quote from Prakash Javadekar, your successor in the current government. And I just want to read out that quote because I think it says a lot. We have brought in fast tracking of project clearances. MOEF is no longer a license permit roadblock, but a people-friendly facilitator. This is Prakash Javadekar. He has said this today in the Hindustan Times. And I think it's a loaded statement because, I mean, of course, there are, you can get into all sorts of comparisons also on, whether it was the UPA or the NDA, how did they look at environmental issues? And if I can just say so here, if we are just looking at, in terms of clearances, Anand spoke about clearances, and if we just look at typically there is the tendency to look at just the number of projects cleared. I would say, if you look at statistics, the NDA and the UPA would be exactly the same. The only difference is, I think the UPA did some lip service to the environment, and I don't think the NDA is doing even that. I think that's the only difference. You have an environment minister who comes forward and says it's a people-friendly facilitator, and he's very proud of this record. Whereas I think with the UPA, you at least had a minister who came forward and said, yes, but. I'm not sure if the clearance rates would be any different. But having said that, I think the other problem is we need to move away from clearance rates and look at, as you said, compliance. Because in my days of reporting, Mr. Jairam Ramesh would pass an order. We would go down to the field and we would find that even when you were saying yes, but you would impose some 10 conditions. Most of those conditions were never being followed. So if there was a dam which had been cleared, on the Ganga, you would find that the condition was that yes, we allow the dam, but by ensuring that you do compensatory afforestation, for instance. So we found that the compensatory afforestation was not being done in Uttaranchal, it was being done in Uttar Pradesh. Or you would find that the dam had been given clearance if they deposited the muck responsibility. Now, there's huge tons of silt and muck which comes out of the river when a dam is constructed. That was being dumped in the river. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why the flooding of 2012, the Himalayan tsunami which happened, that was one of the reasons which was cited why the flooding had happened. So I think we do need to get more and more into compliance, and this obsession with, is Mr. Jairam Ramesh clearing projects or Prakash Javadekar? I think we need to stop playing that numbers game and look more at compliance. I just want to briefly talk about the high-level committee, because I think what's happening to the land acquisition bill is happening right now to the environment as well, and no one's talking about it. There is, I assume everyone in this room is aware, there's a high-level committee which was set up by the current government, and they actually have made a number of suggestions. I wish we could have I would have liked to show you that. So I did a critique of that. And it's what is being suggested in that high-level committee is all kinds of things like the polluter will police himself. The whole process by which they've arrived at dismantling all the environment laws is that they did these closed door meetings in 4 or 5 parts of the country, and that's it. They did not ever go down to the ground level where these environment laws impact communities. That never happened. It makes suggestions like judicial bodies like the National Green Tribunal, which in fact, you've mentioned it in your book as well, and you were responsible, I would say the key architect for that. They want to replace that with an administrative body called NEMA, which is the National Environment Management Authority. We've spoken about pollution and the regulatory framework. It talks about creating giving more power to the states. And it says we want to do away with license Raj, but it doesn't talk about how the states are then going to interact with the center. So you're actually duplicating the license Raj. I don't see how it does away with it. So I just feel that while the Congress right now and Sonia Gandhi and Mr. Jairam Ramesh are very obsessed with the land acquisition bill right now, this high-level committee also needs your attention. So that's just my 2 bits. And I've read your book. I think it's a fantastic record of some of the decisions that you made in your time in the government. I was actually following and reporting and tracking some of those decisions, so it was nice to actually revisit that and see that on paper. It's a brilliant record of everything that's put together. What I really wished for was a backstory on, were you getting calls from the PMO saying, we want to know that? So we were hoping that would be there in this book. So I'll just stop that. Those are my 2 bits. Thank you.
You want me to go ahead? Yeah, thanks, Anand. First of all, thank you very much to the UChicago for the center for inviting me, and it's an honor to be with you here, sir. I remember meeting you in your office many times when you were minister, and I'm walking away saying, I wish there were more ministers who had more transparency and were open to more debate like you did. And I remember having a few heated debates with you on a whole bunch of issues. What I bring to the table today is industry's perspective. I'll share with you what I think we need to do from industry's side in order to fix the challenges we face in India. I'll just walk you through a little bit of my own personal journey to explain to you the challenges I see, I used to be with GE for 15 years of my life, and then decided that in our country, we still have 300, 400 million people who don't have electricity, right? And I used to think to myself, in a large corporation like this, we have all the technology, we have the capital, why don't we go fix it? And the problems I used to see was this fundamental debate as to, for conventional power versus clean energy, and I decided that if a corporation like GE don't want to take up this challenge, why don't I go do it? And that's when, after 15 years, I decided to leave and go and try to fix some of the energy challenges we have in our country. Let me just share some statistics with you so you get a perspective of the scale. We have today in Asia about 500 million people. By 2020, we'll have 1.75 billion people in the middle class in Asia. It's going to be the biggest demographic we'll see in our lifetime. What does that mean? As the middle class increases 3 times over the next 6 years, consumption for energy is going to increase dramatically. Point number 2, in terms of consumption of energy in 2010, the United States consumed 13,395 kilowatt hours per person per year in 2010. In China, that same year, they consumed about 2,995 units. In India, we consumed 626. Last year, United States consumed 14,000, China 4,000, and India, we had about 800. Now, if you think as this middle class grows and as consumption grows, we need to think about what that's going to do to our environment as well, right? So that's one side of the story. The second side of the story is China. I tell everybody that when one goes and sees the situation in China, I hope in our country we don't make the same mistakes. In China, in 1978, they consumed 700 million tons of coal to produce thermal energy. Last year, they consumed 3.9 billion tons of coal to produce thermal energy. 49% of all the coal in the world is being consumed by China to produce energy today. In the next couple of years, they'll touch over 4 billion tons of coal. And when I would travel around and I would meet a lot of ministers around the world, I would tell them that this whole climate change debate, while we can keep arguing about emerging markets, developed countries, and all that stuff, on a human level, it's about the quality of air we breathe. If you go to China today, the people in Beijing and Shanghai are revolting against the government because of the quality of air issue. And the situation has become so bad that the Chinese government have really now taken it upon as a task to fix the quality of air problem in Beijing. We are going to face the same problem in India very soon. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's not a West versus an East issue, it's a global issue of air pollution, of climate change, and therefore, all of us together need to do something to fix it. So these are some of the challenges that we're going to face. Now, I don't envy the role of politicians in trying to make these choices because they're difficult choices. Obviously, as an industrialist and coming from business, I would say, we want growth, we want to fix, we want to provide power to people, yet at the same time, at what cost? And that's the fundamental debate that these books kind of pose. And I love books like this because it puts the debate back to us. It puts it in our domain to debate it because we guys have to make these choices. Do we want to provide power to all the people on one hand? On the other hand, what kind of environmental damage do we need to make in order to provide it, right? And these are the debates we need to make. Now, I'll share another quick story to share how large this problem is. I don't know if you remember, so once I came to your office and you were telling me about the water problem in Punjab, specifically in Ludhiana, all these textile companies were putting effluents back into the water, and it's creating cancer problems in Punjab, it's water problems in Punjab, and the situation's getting really bad. And at that time, while I was at GE, we had all the technologies to fix it, but it cost money. The question is, who's going to pay, right? So I would go to Punjab, and I met a whole bunch of people in Punjab and said, listen, here's a big company, we have technology, but we need to figure out a sustainable business model if we are going to be doing it. I can provide some amount of charity, but that's not going to go that far in fixing the problem. So how do we create a problem? Does industry pay for the fixing of the problem? Does government pay for it? How do we fix it? And in a country like ours where we have limited resources and capital, that's going to be the other big dilemma we're all going to face. Who pays to fix the problem? Is it you and us, you and me in this room as citizens of the country who believe in having a clean, safe environment? Is it the government? I just don't know how it all happens. So I'll sort of wrap up my comments in just 3 key points. it's all our problem. It's not a West versus East problem. It's all our problem because the situation is going to get worse. And if we don't figure it out, we will face the same problems in India as China faces today. Two, all we want in industry is predictability. In other words, we can keep having these debates, but once we make a decision, let the compliance really drive it so that we all know the rules of the game, so that we know how to invest and make these decisions as we go forward. And the last thing is, and the last point I want to say is, we all need to think about who's going to pay to fix these problems. So while we can come up with reforms and while we can come up with policies, we need to start thinking about the cost to make all these change happen. So thanks a lot, Anand.
Yeah, thanks very much. I enjoyed the book very much, and I have to confess I'd read some parts of it earlier because there's a lot of the writing in the book, which is already on the net at the on the Ministry of Environment and Forest websites. There are a few lectures which have been circulated, which are sort of nicely edited and put in the book. And there are 3 or 4 things which I took away from here. One was the balancing. I think the manner in which balancing takes place in government and the manner in which decisions are taken in the environmental ministry, I thought that's very well brought out in the book through the speaking orders which Jairam Ramesh authored. And speaking orders lend a great deal of legitimacy to the eventual decision which is taken. As was mentioned, you may agree with it, you may not agree with it, but it's much, much better than an opaque order, which tends to be the norm. There's also a lot of other insights, and wonderful voices across the book on which show the minister's vision, which demonstrate a sensitivity to a very, very large number of issues. And I think, therefore, as a compendium of decisions and a tenure in office, it's a really great insight into the functioning of the central government. Now, using the book and a phrase used in the book, which was building institutions, and the fact that you just cannot have institutions growing up, overnight. I thought I'd use that as a handle for the theme, which is on does environmental regulation in India require reform? And the answer, in my view, is very much so. And I'll provide 4 or 5 points, which I think are very, very urgent and important. First, in terms of institution building, we should recognize that we've completely failed in building even one good environmental institution across the country. We've had environmental law since the 1970s, but we do not have one environmental institution of integrity and capacity. Some of them, the water pollution control boards, they're sort of completely dysfunctional. You have forest bureaucracies, you have wildlife bureaucracies which do not function as they are expected to under the respective laws. You have the Ministry of Environment and Forests, actually, which is just an overwhelming disappointment if you look at it from the standpoint of what the country needs and what it tends to deliver. Look at the challenges as far as the future is concerned, particularly brought about by global climate change. And you'll find that none of these institutions, apart from the past where they failed to deliver, none of them even remotely have the capacity to even envision as to what the challenges in the future are. What then, or where then, lies the solution? I'm going to just make a suggestion or two. It's going to require a lot of work, but I suspect that's the only manner in which this country, and because there's a huge ethical responsibility which we in India have to the entire planet. Every 7th person is an Indian. Our population is going to cross 1.4, 1.5 billion in the next few years. So what are these challenges? The challenges brought about by climate change is you're going to have precipitation patterns which are going to change. You're going to have your glaciers which are going to melt. You're going to have to introduce new methods of crop, the types of crops and agricultural patterns you grow. You're going to have to build your cities very, very differently from the manner in which we build them there. Is there anyone who has the capacity to do this? Do we have any institution whom we can trust? Because that, at the end of the day, in a democracy is very crucial. And I'm afraid I don't see any of these even growing to that role. So there is one thought which I'll leave with you, which is perhaps We tend in India to work our constitution pretty well, much better than the manner in which we work our laws. Our laws we tend, as was indicated, there are violations, there are poor compliance, etc. But somehow there's some sort of an Indian genius in working constitutions well. And so perhaps the level at which we require, we need, just as we have the Chief Election Commissioner, we have the Comptroller General of India, we have the Supreme Court of India, who are constitutional authorities. We have High Court judges. We have a large number. We have, well, at a certain level, institutions even outside the Constitution which work well, which have a good history, like the Reserve Bank of India or SEBI to a lesser extent. So perhaps what we require is some sort of an environment protector of India at a constitutional level. This is an authority whom we will, which probably the courts and citizens will grow to trust, who can envision what is going to be required by your cities, by your people 20 and 30 years from now. And so that's the level at which you require reform, not perhaps tinkering at the level of, changing or strengthening a pollution control board here or there. The second suggestion I would make, just in terms of environmental architecture, is you definitely require a national environmental regulator. You cannot leave it, you may have certain additional regulators, but you require something you need a new bureaucracy. I mean, you cannot have bureaucracies like your pollution control boards, which, for 30 and 40 years have failed. You cannot have coastal regulatory zone authorities, which are just, which exist only on paper. They have no capacities. Now, to come back to the high-level committee, I mean, with great respect to the individuals, but if you see the persons and the personnel over there on that committee, although I'm sure each individual is a great star, there's very much lacking in terms of sensitivity insofar, or even indeed record in terms of environmental accomplishment insofar as the high-level committee which made recommendations is concerned. The third point I'd like to make is that essentially the quality of governance has to improve in our cities. Because when you sit back, the impact which your cities have on the environment, that's where it all comes from, whether it's energy requirements. So unless you improve governance in cities, unless you improve efficiencies in cities, unless you realize that most of your country and your consumers of resources are going to be in cities and lift that up, you are not going to have a change. So it's not just of environmental regulation, but it's really of city governance which you require a major change in. The fourth point I'd like to make is I think we need to recognize that we are sharing this planet. That doesn't come out, I'm sorry, in the book. I mean, you're just one amongst a myriad species on a planet where we are losing, the great extinction is taking place just as we speak. And India, with its culture and history, has an opportunity in terms of regulation to play a huge and new role which recognizes the right to exist of other species other than ourselves. We need to get out of this human right kind of framework into, look, there are other persons out there who have rights as well. And our integrity and our survival depends very much on that. You're not going to get this kind of thing, jurisprudence or lawmaking, going to the West. It's not going to come there because it's culturally probably much easier here to create a space and to share a planet rather than, the go and no-go debate as if sort of lock up all the leopards in a sanctuary. That's not going to work beyond a point because we just don't have enough space for sanctuaries for all our elephant population, for example. You're going to have to share spaces outside sanctuaries with species other than ourselves. And the final point, which, because I suspect I'm running out, is I think we need to rewrite our laws or write our laws differently, more than just rewriting them. In some systems, China was given as an example. The manner in which we write our laws is we give vision statements for bureaucracies which we create without setting targets. I think the time has come now when, apart from creating bureaucracies, we have to set targets into laws. They can't necessarily be attained immediately, but you need to have a statutory limit with regard to the quality of air you breathe, with regard to the quality of water, the water quality in your rivers, across stretches of rivers. Otherwise, I mean, the city I come from is Mumbai. And frankly speaking, the entire Arabian Sea, for several kilometers around Mumbai, is a toilet bowl. I mean, they call it the Arabian Sea, but it's not that. You cannot swim there really with, any degree of confidence. As you might have, say, 30, 40, or 50 years ago. Now, if you're going to change that, you're not going to be able to just tinker with the law here and there. You're going to have to require to have a target that, look, for your riverine water quality, for your coastal water quality, this is it. This is the bureaucracy which we're going to have. You've got 5 years to attain this target. Have probably a constitutional office over there who can sort of drive the agenda and look at 30 and 40 and 50 years. And the final point, the reason I mention is a constitutional office is I think Indian corporates who are essentially in the game as far as, well, they're very good at gaming the system as far as natural resources is concerned. But somehow we've managed with our security of tenure, etc., to prevent constitutional capture. So we were just talking about, for example, a Supreme Court justice who in a few years' time or a few months' time is going to sort of probably, in all probability, become the Chief Justice of India. And because of the manner in which and the traditions which we followed, you can say that this chap's views you may disagree with. But you can be absolutely sure that you can have a great degree of confidence that he's going to take the wrong decision, but not for the wrong reasons. And that's very important in terms of the future, in terms of institution building. And therefore, the final thing, which is you need your constitutional machinery, you need a national bureaucracy under your new regulations, and you need targets which an aspirational population can hope to achieve or attain in 5 and 7 years. Thank you.
So what I think we'll do is we'll have some questions or comments or thoughts from people on the panel and then from the audience, and then we can have you respond at the end. So since I have the mic, let me just make one sort of observation or thought that comes to my mind. So, as I said, a lot of my research is, in partnership with environmental regulators and the pollution control boards, who are sort of at the front lines of what has been criticized today as a somewhat failing and flailing regulatory system. So the question is whether we need wholesale change to fix that, or whether small changes might go a long way. And so let me give you one example of what I mean, and I'd be curious for the thoughts of the others on the panel on this. I was in Maharashtra recently talking to the sub-regional officer of the Maharashtra Pollution Control Board in Chandrapur. The sub-regional officer is the man who interacts with the industry on ground, goes and does sort of pollution tests and audits, and sort of if there's something wrong is supposed to report it up the chain. And so we were looking at the data from one of these power plants, and I won't mention the power plant, but the data from all of them looks the same, which is that, you have a standard, so a target exists, and the target is sort of, say, 150, and you have this plant that's emitting at sort of 900, 1000, and so on, and you ask the sub-regional officer sort of what's going on. Now, this is now data that you can't really share with the public. You don't know what to do with it. And the problem is that when you go to the plant, they will say, so sort of, what are you going to do about this? Are you going to shut me down? And are you going to file a criminal case against a power plant, close down the power plant in the state of Maharashtra, and take me to court, attempting to put me into jail? And the point is, that's really the only tool of enforcement that our laws today leave with the state pollution control boards. And so, one of the questions that this book refers to in passing, but I think doesn't delve into, we could delve into that much more, is sort of whether we need to rethink the regulatory costs involved in enforcement. And so to put that in a different context, if the punishment for jumping a red light in a city was that you were sent to jail after a criminal case, do you think there would be less people jumping red lights, or would there be more people jumping red lights? Would the system be less corrupt, or would the system be more corrupt? So that's just one sort of story, but I think it's interesting to question whether we need wholesale reform or tinkering, and what sort of is the solution.
I'm Dr. Sikka. The recommendations are 55 in number, which has been, you can say, prepared by Mr. T.S.R. Subramanian, former cabinet secretary. And these recommendations are being placed at the consideration of a think tank comprising a couple of experts in this field. And then once they clear it, then might be they'll take it up further. And the point is, further is they can clear it through Lok Sabha, but the Rajya Sabha is a problem. Prakash Javadekar wanted to get it done through ordinance, but then our president's office suggested that, look, everything can't be sent to the ordinance, You only 6 or 7 bills should be cleared by the ordinance and not all of them. So these are high level, decision of environmental law requiring full debate in the parliament, and because whole of the country is concerned. So get them clear from the parliament route and not through the ordinance route. So there is this sort of a obstruction.
Good evening, sir. I'm Bhuvan from Amity Law School, Delhi. So the question I want to ask is that what exactly is stopping our country from making a greater transition to switching to renewable energy, considering the fact we have a huge potential, and there was one research which said just 7% of Delhi's rooftops are covered with solar panels. We really don't need to depend on coal anymore. So that will help us from deforestation and a lot of problems. So is that because the coal giants run a risk of unemployment, or what is the greater concern that we have?
Sorry, I think I hijacked the mic. So I'm from University of Chicago. I'm an alumni from there, and I spent 7 years working in U.S. in water wastewater industry. So my question is for the whole panel, and what I have seen in U.S. is they use cap and trade, especially in the water industry, wastewater industry, for both municipal and industrial waste. They try to set some limits and then try keeping that, they try reducing that limit. They try to lower the limit after every couple of years, so that whatever investment need to be made, first of all, those technologies can be developed. Industry is there. They have all those financial plans in their budgets and everything. So have we considered those type of things, especially this is for this question concerns industrial industry, because if government don't have the enough support, enough money, then maybe industry can plan for those type of investment. Especially some of those investment would require a lot of planning and a lot of work as well. So can this panel speak a little bit about those?
My name is Alik. I work with the IIC at the University of Chicago. My question is for Mr. Ramesh. It's more of a personal question. I've always been fascinated by the geopolitics of climate change, right? And you also brought up how China, for example, has been, and we know it's been growing and it's been removing a lot of people from poverty much faster than India has, at least in the past decade, right? And some would argue that when we look at the lives, right, which did not get the same opportunities, that also is a tangible impact, just like the health impact of environmental, of not adhering to environmental laws and regulations is a tangible impact. And what are the moral dimensions of it, and how do countries, negotiate this? Because you really, it's like a zero-sum game, right? So as societies, should we even think of applying our vision of what is right down to a person who has to make a choice between his livelihood and whether he'll get a health problem 20 years down the line? Why are we making the choice, and why is that choice not delegated down to people?
I'm Prashant Kumar Pal. I'm into teaching and research in the area of nanobiotechnology. So I've been wondering for past almost a decade. In India, biotechnology is quite 25 years old, probably. US 50 years. Now, still we have got a conflict when some product is we are going to launch or we want to bring it to the market. For example, brinjal issue. And now, we are looking for nanotechnology. A lot of nanoparticles are going to be in air. know, what we are doing and all these policies and laws. They have to, actually, all the bodies have to get together to form the law. Now, if I start working on some nanoparticle, then again, you know, there is no clear policy whether I can do it or not, and I publish a paper, and there are other implications like that. So things are not clear. Using of particles in health, it might get released in air or something like that. Thank you.
I'm Ranjit Kirpalani. I am a law student. And my question is very basic. What I feel is the root cause of our partially demolished environment is in our moral upbringing, which has become our trait. How do we change this perspective of the people from a chalta hai attitude or a laissez-faire attitude into a willing collective responsibility towards the society or country? And I believe so. All this is required to abolish the Inspector Raj.
One on renewables. I think on the renewables ones, absolutely, because that's what we focus on. You know, I tell everybody that a day might come where all of us in this room could become what we call prosumers, which is not only consumers of energy, but producers of energy. And I do believe that this new business model will happen in emerging markets like ours than in developed countries. And therefore, technically, all of us in this room could have a solar panel on our roof, and we could produce our own power. We could, in fact, sell the excess power back into the grid, and we could go completely off grid. The challenge we have is this. In the United States, the reason why companies like SolarCity have taken off is the fact that, one, there is a good financing system in place, and two, there's a good default system. So if somebody doesn't pay up, you actually have the right of law to go out there and take your asset back. The challenge I have out here, I'd love to provide the financing and provide solar solutions to everybody in this room. The challenge I have is this, is that I'm a technology guy. We can provide the solution. The technology exists. But how do I ensure that I come to your house to pay me that money every month? I don't have that infrastructure. So we need to think of a new business model to make that happen. The second problem is just this, is that say you stop paying the money, what do? My asset's sitting on your rooftop, and if you don't allow me to get onto your rooftop to take my asset back, how does that all work? So until we figure out some practical challenge, some practical mechanism for me to go out there and get it out, that's the way it's really going to start taking off. Because very few people yet can afford to put up solar panels yet. The price of solar has come down dramatically over the last 5 years from about $6 a watt down to 55 cents a watt. And it's going to go down a little further. But yet, it's still out of the reach of a lot of us to go out there and put up solar solutions on our rooftops. The only other point I'd say is the real breakthrough, and I'm doing a lot of pilot projects right now, and I was in Japan about a month ago to look at some new technologies, is going to be storage. The day we can actually produce energy and store the energy and consume the energy when we want to consume it, that's really going to change the way we consume energy around this country. And in fact, some of the technologies that I saw in Japan was a household where a whole community, 20 houses, have solar panels, storage, and it was sort of like a sharing mechanism. So as my battery storage goes up to about 100%, and if you're at home and you start consuming energy, my house will export energy to your household. And similarly, if you start consuming it, he'll export power to her. So that's sort of the way that, and these sort of microgrids are going to happen very soon. And I think as price points come down, that'll sort of take off. So that was that. On the point on cap and trade, I think it's absolutely valid. I think we need mechanisms like this. I think we all know the solution. We all smart people in India. We know what to do. It's about enforcing it. How do we go to these small textile units in Punjab and make them feel the need to take a hit, to pay for what they're doing? Is all this affluent thing that's going in, they need to pay for it. So I think we do have the mechanisms. We know what the solutions are. It's about how do we enforce it across the country. So those are sort of the 2 points on renewable energy that I'd sort of share.
On one point which you said about the sub-regional officer and the Maharashtra Pollution Control Board, and I'd probably link it up with cap and trade at a certain level. Essentially, we just don't have the capacity to prosecute. You see, all these systems are based on the fact, the example which you gave of a textile unit which was sort of spewing some effluent, totally, confident that no one is going to be able to prosecute. What it requires is a capacity first to be able to grab a sample which is bad, whether it's an air sample or a water sample or something hazardous, grab it, send it to a laboratory, have it tested in a manner in which it will stand up in court, then present a case in court and convict. We do not have a capacity at any level. I mean, it's not, we just don't have the ability to get a sample. We don't have an ability to transport that sample to the lab with the appropriate seal so that a defense lawyer will not demolish it. We don't have a capacity as lawyers to be able to advise clients. Well, the board doesn't even have a lawyer who knows any of this. The lawyer in your typical pollution control board spends about 75% of his time on service matters, which is, with regard to someone complaining about promotion, someone complaining about, some reservation element, this element, that element. So that's what we consume our time on. So linking back to the thing, even on cap and trade, it requires a much more sophisticated degree of compliance, of monitoring, and I don't see it happening anytime soon in the Indian context.
Since we're talking about capacity and manpower, any day, just go to the National Green Tribunal, and on the left side, you'll have industry, and you will have at least a minimum of 30 to 40 lawyers sitting on that side to defend industry and whatever pollution that they're doing. And on this side, on the right side, in favor of the environment, there'll be one lawyer at the most. That's it. So that's how you see the balance of power. You just go to the National Green Tribunal on any day, and that's how you'll find how lopsided it is.
The last questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ramesh. Someone who hasn't had a chance yet, if possible, just to spread. Anyone else? No? Okay.
Hello. My question to Mr. Ramesh, relating to the question of credit points which emerged during our international conferences on climate change, that the developed world or the developing countries can earn the credit points by taking money from the financial assistance from the developed world based on the concept of polluter pays. Now, in the light of this land acquisition bill, the land is going to shrink, the green land, the green space. The green space will be little and little. And how can we earn the credit point and to get the money from abroad or money from the developed world, who are giving us the old technologies, who's given us the so-called the sources of pollution, and how are we going to match these two, the issues of credit point vis-a-vis the reduction or the shrinkage of the space, Thank you.
Large number of points, I think I have a mic here. Large number of points have been made, and just let me address some of the more important ones and the big ones. Start with Bahar's complaint that there is no masala in this book. Yeah, it's a vegetarian book. It's a deeply vegetarian book. It doesn't have, who said what, to whom, when, and why, orally, because I really wanted to get out of that culture, because Indian culture is an oral culture. We must get into the written culture. And that's what one of the messages in this book, that, more and more people in public life should depend less and less on oral stuff and more on the written word. But yes, I agree that the oral word is much more interesting. But I am afraid that will have to wait the demise not only of the dramatis personae, but also of the author, because I'm not about to. Is that why you left it out? No, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, I mean, there were interesting battles. Sure. And there were interesting battles. And some of the things I've tried to bring out, and frankly, most of the battles, even the oral battles, I converted it into a letter, because I wanted to bring it into the public domain. There's one very hilarious letter which I have used in the book, when Veerbhadra Singh, who was the Minister of Steel, accosted me before a cabinet meeting, and that's one of the rare moments of candor I've allowed myself. He accosted me and he said, you know, you must be pragmatic. You must not be dogmatic. You must be pragmatic. And I told him, then I said something to him, and then I said, I must record this. So I went back and I wrote a letter to him saying that, Veerbhadraji, you met me outside the cabinet meeting and you said, I must be pragmatic and not dogmatic, but what really meant was I must be automatic. You know, so that's what that was in the context of the POSCO controversy. So there's a lot of oral stuff which is not there, and I take that. Now, young Sudarshan's point, the 91 moment was, maybe I should have explained this a little, and I should. In economic policy, the 91 moment stood for deregulation and wholesale liberalization of the economy. For environment, I saw the 91 moment somewhat differently. I saw the 91 moment in terms of making environment a serious issue. Don't take environment for granted. I mean, this is not a fait accompli. You've got to comply with the laws of the land. So to that extent, it was a 91 moment. It was a 91 moment for economic policy was largely in the context of liberalization, but the 91 moment for environment was not really in the context of liberalization, but in the context of enforcement and compliance of the existing rules. But I think that should come out far more clearly. Now, on the environmental regulation side, this is going to be a big issue. I mean, what the government does with the high-level committee, they'll have to go through parliament, they'll have to go through public debate. All that will take some time. But to me, the direction is very clear. And one paradigm shift that is almost inevitable is a transfer of greater and greater regulatory responsibility to the states. Now, I'm not so sure that's a good thing to do, by the way. Even in the US, much of the environmental regulation is federal regulation, federal enforcement, compliance with federal laws. I'm not entirely convinced that, particularly insofar as forests, for example, are concerned. In fact, the Forest Conservation Act in 1980 came about because of a concern of large-scale illegal felling and diversion of forest land, precisely because before 1976, forest was in the states list of the Constitution, and it only comes onto the concurrent list in 1976. And so therefore, it's not entirely clear to me that this is a good direction to go. But today's theology is cooperative federalism, give more power to states. That may be good in fiscal matters, but not necessarily good in environmental matters. So that's a big issue. The second issue, of course, is we're moving from polluter pays to polluter polices, which I think is a very dangerous concept. Yeah, I mean, polluter polices itself. And pretty soon the polluter will be policing the other polluter also. That's how these things actually work out, So that's also not a desirable direction to take. I mean, I'm quite taken up with Shyam's point on the respect we have for constitutional bodies in an otherwise environment of disrespect for public institutions. And there's much merit in what he says. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why there was a talk about making the Lokpal also a constitutional body, which has not happened. But nevertheless, all our constitutional bodies have in fact emerged as very strong institutions, irrespective of which the governments are. And therefore, there's some merit in what you have to say. And I think we should take it very seriously. Now, Tejveer's point is, yes, we are where China was in the early 80s. And we are consuming about 700 million tons of coal now. And if we are looking to the next 15 years, we're going to reach 3 billion tons by the year 2030. So we'll be in 2030 where China will be in 2020 or thereabouts. So we have a historic choice in front of us. Do we follow the Chinese route, or do we follow a different route? And in fact, in the last chapter of my book, I give 4 reasons why India must not follow the Chinese route, which is basically the grow now, pay later model, which is, have 8% rate of growth for 25 years and then worry about the consequences later. I mean, there's a demographic argument. Shyam has talked about it. We're going to add 400 million people in the next 15 years. There's a climate change argument. It's a very real vulnerability that India faces across many fronts. There's a public health argument, which is now becoming very, very apparent in terms of pollution, its impact on both morbidity and mortality. And there is, of course, the livelihood argument, that people are more and more getting concerned about livelihoods, forest issues, water issues, land issues, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I'm just parenthetically, I want to add here that today's newspaper, or yesterday's newspaper, or today's newspaper, Economic Times, had an interesting article on how Aborigines were objecting to the Adani coal mine in Queensland. I mean, this is a Vedanta moment for Queensland, and it's very interesting, the same Mr. Adani, when 36 conditions were imposed on him for his project in Mundra, protested that this is stifling Indian enterprise. But when the Queensland government imposed the same 36 conditions on his project, he swallowed it, and State Bank gave him $1 billion to implement his project, or about to give him $1 billion. So, Indian business is unwilling to accept the rules of the game. They accept it abroad, but they don't want to accept it here, precisely because of the reason that Shyam mentioned, because they've gamed the system, and they know how to do bypass on all the rules and regulations. So I think the point that you make is very, very significant, is very important, and India's options are not all that open anymore because of the climate change, what's happening on the climate change scenario. We cannot have a situation where India will have unbridled increase in consumption of coal. And that, by the way, that is going to have disastrous environmental consequences domestically, both in terms of mining as well as in terms of utilization. So what you're saying in terms of the fact that we need to make some changes in the way on the growth trajectory, 8% or 8.5% growth trajectory is very significant, and renewables will play a very important role in that. Nuclear will have to play a very important role, although environmentalists will not, be happy. Bahar, who was otherwise sympathetic towards me on most of my speaking orders, criticized me very, very vehemently on her channel for the Jaitapur environmental clearance. So nuclear is the red rag to the green bull. So the Greens don't like environment, but nuclear is going to play a very important role, and so will hydropower. But hydropower has its own problems: submergence, forest areas, displacement, relocation of people. So India's options are not easy. I think the point that I'm trying to say in the book is that there are no simple solutions. These are choices you make. And sometimes the choice you make will favor one of the two sides. But you can't please all people at all times. One of the most painful decisions I had to take, perhaps the most painful decision, was to abandon a hydel project on the upper reaches of the Ganga in the Bhagirathi, where 40% of the work had been completed. Now, why environmental clearance was given in the first place beats me. But they got the environmental clearance. This is not a private company, it's a government company. They spent 1,000 crores. And then, all sorts of issues came about, environmental issues and, issues about sustainability, minimum ecological flow. And finally, that project had to be abandoned. This is the Lohari Nagpala hydel project, and it was producing 800 megawatts of electricity. So these are not easy choices. These are very difficult choices. In the case of Vedanta, the refinery had been built. A 6 million ton refinery had been built. And in the case of POSCO, the steel plant was about to be constructed. So these are, the choices are not easy. And to say, because either you must stop this project or you must clear this project, does not do full justice to either side, either the need for the project or for the against the project. But I agree with you, Anand, that really it's not the clearance issue, but it's the compliance issue that should preoccupy us more. We should be more worried about compliance, enforcement of rules, enforcement of regulations, and that's where Shyam is absolutely right. The governance framework has to facilitate effective implementation, effective compliance, and that's not there in today's context. Today it's more individual, it's not institutional. And I think what we need to move from an individual focus to a more institutional focus. I'll just end by saying that, going back to what Bahar quoted today's newspaper, quoting the minister, Mr. Javadekar, it's a sad day when the Minister for Environment becomes the Minister for Environmental Clearances. Because there is a certain ugliness to this job. The ugliness comes from the need to say no on some occasions. Not all the time. You can't play Dr. No all the time. But you have to be able to stand up and say, look, this is not in the national interest. And the one issue that perhaps really accelerated my departure from the ministry, which I don't talk about in the book, the departure, but I talk about the issue, which is the go, no-go issue as far as coal mining is concerned. Because that really threatened the entire corporate sector, who had made huge investments in power and coal, but clearly, if you had allowed them to mine the coal, it would have meant more coal, but it would have meant permanent destruction of the forests. So these are the choices, and I think it's not going to be easy as is being made out to be. That we just remove this environmental roadblock, we give all these clearances, and we'll have this rapid growth, and then we'll worry about the consequences of that growth, say 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I think that's somewhat of a short-sighted strategy. And my own feeling is that, like on land acquisition, there will be a reaction to this wholesale and large-scale dismantling of the regulatory edifice. I think the judiciary will react. I think what the senior judge of the Supreme Court said in public a couple of days ago in response to an observation made by a minister who was sitting next to him, was symptomatic of that. I think the judiciary will respond. I think civil society will respond. I think the 3 cheers for Justice Shagdar of the Delhi High Court for his judgment on the Greenpeace activist case, because I think that really, had it gone the other way, then civil society would have been completely silenced. But I think there is some hope that civil society will now raise this issue. And finally, I think business itself will become far more conscious of sustainability practices, because that they will realize that it's a triple bottom line. You cannot just have profits and you destroy forests and pollute your way to prosperity. So I'm actually quite optimistic that even though the desire of the government would be to lighten the regulatory burden, there would be sufficient countervailing power from the judiciary, from civil society, which would maintain a balance between dismantling or liberalizing, but keeping the due diligence in place. I mean, that's essentially the way I look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Ramesh, for summarizing the evening's debate and your responses to the various questions that were put forward. On behalf of the Bharati Institute of Public Policy and the Indian School of Business, I want to thank you for taking time out this evening. Also want to thank the other panelists, Bahar Dutt, Anand Sudarshan, TP Chopra, and Shyam Diwan, for your wonderful insights into what went into making this evening's debate or discussion as it ended up eventually very meaningful and insightful for all of us. Some of you may be aware, but I do want to mention it here that Mr. Jairam Ramesh is actually a distinguished fellow at the Bharati Institute of Public Policy and is also one of the founding members of the Indian School of Business. So it's that much more meaningful for us as ISB to co-host this event this evening. Organizing an event like this requires a fair bit of preparation and a lot of efforts that goes into the background. I want to acknowledge the efforts of Rachna Kalra and team at the OUP, Aditi Modi and team at the UChicago Center, also for giving out this wonderful premises for this evening event. I also want to thank my colleagues Kaushiki and team at the Bharati Institute who have worked in making this event a success. I do look forward to more such collaborative events as we sort of collectively endeavor to provide quality events to our various constituents. Finally, the copies of the book are available here on to my left side, and Mr. Ramesh will be here for a few more minutes for those of you who want to get a copy and get signed by him. Thank you so much and have a good Friday evening. Thank you.